This talk presents the status of current validation work done on a knowledge, attitudes, and practices type survey created to study academic librarians and their OER competencies. To introduce our research team, Jenn Monnin is a research support and engagement librarian at West Virginia University. Riley Richards is a communications faculty member at Oregon Tech who specializes in survey research. And Kristin Whitman is a library director and OER coordinator at Oregon Tech. We believe that OER is not just for OER librarians, and that many academic library roles are well positioned to support the open education movement. As just one example, for subject librarians, each connection with a faculty member is an opportunity to discuss the open movement, share relevant open materials, or promote available professional development opportunities. As more OER librarian positions are created, OER may begin to seem like a separate branch of librarianship. However, single advocates within institutions cannot shoulder the entire burden of creating culture changes within those institutions. Ideally, most academic librarians would be ready to support OER practices which fall within the scope of their normal job responsibilities. The OER literature describes various ways that academic librarians are involved in the OER movement. In their 2019 paper, Bradley and Van Scoy identified a large number of library functions that tie into OER and open education movement goals. Librarians can educate faculty, consult on licensing issues, help faculty search and discover relevant OER, create metadata and maintain repositories, support OER publishing, engage in advocacy and policy development, and more. A literature search also shows that there have been attempts to study OER knowledge, attitudes, and/or practices of academic librarians. The studies we identified were centered around particular countries, with investigations taking place in Nigeria, Scotland, and Ukraine. Within these studies, surveys vary to their purpose and the methods employed to validate them. After reviewing the survey instruments where they were available, our team determined that they would not meet our own research needs. Knowledge, Attitudes, and Practices, or KAP surveys, originated in the 1950s among family planning researchers. They are now widely used in the healthcare field to identify baseline knowledge, myths, misconceptions, attitudes, and behaviors, to provide information on barriers to the development of relevant educational interventions, and to measure post-intervention changes. An excellent review is in our references section by Andrade et al. From 2020. Our research goal was to develop and validate a survey instrument to measure the KAP of academic librarians toward OER. We see the validated instrument as a useful tool for subsequent investigations into the relative levels of KAP within library subgroups, for example, within disciplinary groups such as medical versus engineering librarian KAP levels. Because KAP instruments are useful to measure the effectiveness of educational interventions, the survey could also be used in a pre-post test experimental research design. We approached creating this survey instrument by mapping Bradley and Van Scoy's extensive list of ways librarians can support OER to a list of potential domains of librarian OER involvement. For each domain, we then generated a list of questions. We shared our draft survey instrument with 6 OER experts, and some items were changed based on the expert feedback, and additional items were added, particularly related to diversity, equity, inclusion implications of OER, and to open pedagogy. Here are some examples of the lists of OER knowledge and attitude domains that we extracted from the literature. Here's an example of some draft questions we used in the pilot round of testing. Some redundant questions with slight variations in wording were included as part of the survey validation process. We conducted a pilot test of 30 respondents recruited from our personal networks, and the initial results allowed us to identify items on the survey which were outliers within each subscale and had low internal reliability. After the pilot, we were able to reduce the survey length to 74 items. Our sample population was anyone who identified as an academic librarian or had an MLIS and worked in an education setting. There were no country restrictions. After redrafting the survey based on pilot results, we embarked on data collection for our test survey by distributing it to academic librarian email lists, including librarian lists within disciplinary associations. 156 responses were analyzed. Our survey expert then performed statistical analysis known as exploratory factor analysis, or EFA. Because our survey contains multiple subscales, for example, knowledge and attitudes, we needed to make sure all the items within each subscale complement each other and allow us to generate an average score across a subscale. Items with poor internal agreement with other items in that subscale can cause unreliable results, and items which relate to multiple subscales can lead to inflated results as they are double counted. Exploratory factor analysis extends expert review by analyzing test data to support our interpretation of which items will be useful to measure each subscale. EFA minimizes human bias by removing items that are not well correlated to others within the survey and mathematically do not appear to have a strong relationship with the overall factor we hope to measure. Our initial factor analysis led to some interesting results. Firstly, while we expected knowledge and attitudes to be factors identified by the analysis, we found that the attitudes factor actually split into two different factors: general OER attitudes and attitudes toward the role of librarians in OER. In other words, librarian attitudes toward OER generally aren't strongly correlated to views on whether librarians should be playing a role in OER work. Another finding was that within our attitudes questions, we had some questions that required respondents to agree or disagree with common OER myths. And these questions were frequently skipped by respondents. We can't be certain of the reason, but for right now, these are not useful items for our subscale and will be removed in the final instrument. Further studies could include qualitative approaches to delve into why these questions present challenges. We also found that the concept of practices as it relates to this topic is not a useful subscale and should be treated as an index in terms of survey reporting. It is difficult to measure librarian practices as there are a wide variety of OER support functions, not all of which are related to an individual librarian's job description. There were many not applicable answers in this section as we needed a way for respondents to indicate that a practice was not part of their role. For example, you wouldn't normally expect creating metadata for OER to be part of an instruction librarian's role or vice versa. Calling practices an index means that the results cannot be averaged into an overall score for that subscale. The results can only be summarized. We can see which practices are in use within a population, but cannot assign a single average score for practices. Our next steps will be to revise our survey based on the results of the exploratory factor analysis. We will be able to reduce the number of items in the survey, including removing items correlated to more than one factor, which inflate survey scores. We will also remove items with high communality extraction values, which are not useful for measuring the factor based on statistics. And we will remove redundant items which do not account for unique variance in results. A shorter survey will reduce participant survey fatigue. Once our survey is revised, we will be collecting another round of data to run confirmatory factor analysis. So librarians, please keep your eye out on OER listservs for the next call for participation. We truly appreciate your support of our research. Here are our references for this presentation. Thanks for watching.